The email arrived at 0347 local time, Kandahar. I was pulling night shift at the communication center when my phone buzzed with that familiar chime. Becky's name lit up the screen, but the subject line made something cold settle in my stomach. Let's be adults about this. I'd been deployed with the 82nd Airborne for 7 months. 15 years in the Army had taught me to read situations fast, and I already knew what this was before I opened it. Nathan, I've filed for divorce. The papers are being served to your unit. I've moved Jeremy into the house since you're not using it. Also cleaned out the joint account since I'll need money for the transition. Let's handle this like adults. No drama. B. I stared at the screen for maybe 30 seconds. Around me, the comm center hummed with the usual late-night chatter. Status updates, supply requests, the background noise of a war that kept grinding forward whether your personal world fell apart or not. My fingers found the reply button. I typed one word. Understood. Hit send. Wilson, my bunkmate, looked over from his station. Bad news from home? Wife filed for divorce, moved her boyfriend into my house. Wilson whistled low. Damn, Briggs. You okay? I closed the phone and went back to monitoring radio traffic. I'm fine. And I was. That probably sounds cold, but the truth is, I'd seen this coming for months before deployment. The signs had been there like breadcrumbs leading to this moment. Late nights at the dental office where she worked. Sudden gym memberships with no results. New passwords on everything. That emotional distance that spreads between people like ice forming on a pond. The Army teaches you to prepare for contingencies. Always have a backup plan. Always secure your assets. Before deployment, I'd quietly opened a private account at a different bank. Moved some valuables and important documents to a storage unit off base. Arranged for a portion of my pay to be direct deposited separately. Even installed a discreet security system at the house. Told Becky it was for peace of mind while I was overseas. I'd hoped I was being paranoid. Turns out I was being smart. Wilson was still watching me. So what's your plan? I finished logging a supply request and looked at him. 15 years in the Army had taught me a lot of things, but maybe the most important was this. When someone hits you, you don't hit back in anger. You respond with overwhelming calculated force. I don't start fights, I said, but I do finish them. Captain Morrison was drinking his second cup of coffee when I knocked on his office door at 0630. He looked up from a stack of personnel reports and gestured for me to sit down. What's on your mind, Sergeant Briggs? Sir, I need to request emergency leave. Family situation back home. Morrison leaned back in his chair. He was a good officer, the kind who understood that soldiers had lives outside the Army and that sometimes those lives required immediate attention. What kind of situation? My wife filed for divorce, sir. She's also cleaned out our joint bank account and moved another man into my house. I need to get back to protect my financial interests and ensure the divorce proceedings are handled properly. Morrison's expression tightened. How much money are we talking about? Nearly $90,000, sir. Jesus. He reached for a form from his desk drawer. That's definitely grounds for emergency leave. How long do you need? 2 weeks should be sufficient, sir. I'll have the paperwork processed today. You can be on a transport to Germany tomorrow morning. I stood up to leave, but Morrison held up a hand. Sergeant Briggs, I don't know what your wife is thinking, but what she's doing is wrong. You've got 15 years of good service, and you don't deserve this kind of treatment while you're deployed. Thank you, sir. One more thing. When you get back to the States, don't do anything stupid. I know you're probably angry, but anything you do in anger is going to make your situation worse, not better. Understood, sir. I plan to handle this through proper legal channels. Morrison nodded. Good man. Get out of here and take care of your business. 26 hours later, I was on a Lufthansa flight from Frankfurt to Seattle, staring out the window at the Atlantic Ocean and thinking about the phone call I'd made from the airport in Germany. James had answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting for my call. Nathan Briggs. I heard through the grapevine that you were deployed. What's the emergency? I'd laid it out for him in the same calm, professional tone I'd used with Captain Morrison. The divorce filing, the boyfriend, the cleaned-out bank account. James had listened without interrupting, and I could hear him taking notes. "I can meet you at SeaTac," he'd said. "What time does your flight get in?" 13:47 local time. "I'll be there." "And Nathan?" "Start documenting everything. Screenshots, bank records, emails, anything you can get your hands on. If this is as bad as it sounds, we're going to need evidence." Now, somewhere over Greenland, I was doing exactly that. I'd downloaded every bank statement from the past year, saved copies of all my email exchanges with Becky, even pulled up our joint credit card accounts to see if there had been any unusual activity. What I found made the cold thing in my chest grow larger. The joint credit cards showed charges I didn't recognize. Expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. Hotel stays in cities where Becky had no business being. A jewelry purchase for $3,200 at a store I'd never seen before. All of it dating back to about 2 months after my deployment began. She'd been planning this for longer than I'd realized. James was waiting at baggage claim, exactly where he'd said he'd be. He looked older than I remembered. 3 years of civilian life had added some gray to his temples and some weight to his midsection. But his handshake was firm, and his eyes were sharp. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks. You too." He laughed, the first genuine moment of humor I'd experienced in 3 days. "Fair enough. Come on, let's get some food and you can show me what you found." We drove to a diner near the airport, the kind of place that served coffee in heavy ceramic mugs and didn't ask questions about customers who needed to spread papers across an entire table. James had brought a briefcase full of legal documents, and I had a folder full of bank statements and credit card records. "The divorce filing is straightforward," James said, scanning through the papers. "Washington's a no-fault state, so her affair doesn't matter legally in terms of the marriage dissolution. But this financial stuff..." He tapped a bank statement with his pen. "This could be criminal." "How criminal?" "Well, let's start with the obvious. Joint account means joint access, so technically she had the right to withdraw the money. Morally reprehensible, especially while you're deployed, but probably legal." He pulled out another document, this one with official-looking letterhead from our mortgage company. This, however, is where it gets interesting. It was a refinance application for our house. My signature was at the bottom, along with Becky's. The application was dated 2 weeks ago, requesting to refinance our existing $180,000 mortgage and pull out an additional $330,000 in cash. The problem was, I'd never seen it before in my life. "She forged your signature on a VA loan refinance," James said. $330,000. "And look here, Jeremy's listed as a co-applicant." I studied the signature line. It was good, close enough to fool a casual observer, but I knew my own handwriting better than anyone. The N in Nathan had too much of a flourish. The B in Briggs was too rounded. It was a very good forgery, but it was still a forgery. "Where's the money now?" James smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "That's the beautiful part." The bank flagged it. Apparently, someone in their underwriting department got suspicious about a deployed soldier refinancing his house without being physically present for the signing. "They've frozen the funds pending verification of your identity and intent." I felt something shift inside me, like a chess piece moving into position. So they tried to steal $330,000 on top of the $88,000 they already took. It looks that way. And Nathan? Your boy Jeremy got himself arrested yesterday. For what? Driving your truck with a suspended license. Apparently, he's been using your vehicle as his personal transportation. Cops pulled him over for running a red light, ran his ID, and discovered the license issue. James pulled out another document, a police report. But here's the really interesting part. When they impounded the truck, they found a bag of prescription pads in the glove compartment. Prescription pads? From Becky's dental office. Specifically, blank prescription forms for controlled substances. Apparently, our dear Mrs. Briggs has been supplementing her income in some very creative ways. I leaned back in the booth, trying to process this new information. The divorce was one thing. The theft of our savings was another. But prescription fraud was federal territory. DEA, FBI, serious prison time. How many prescription pads are we talking about? According to the police report, 47 blank forms. Street value depends on what you write on them, but we're probably talking about tens of thousands of dollars in potential illegal drug sales. The cold thing in my chest was growing again, but now it was accompanied by something else, a sense that we were only seeing the beginning of something much larger. James, I need you to dig deeper into this. The forged signature, the prescription fraud, Jeremy's background. This feels like more than just my cheating wife making bad decisions. He nodded, making notes in a legal pad. Already ahead of you. I've got a private investigator who specializes in financial crimes. And there's one name that keeps popping up in your financial records that I want to look into. What name? Daniel Spencer, real estate agent. He's been copied on several emails between Becky and the mortgage company. Apparently, he's the one who's supposed to handle the sale of your house after the refinance goes through. Sale of my house? According to these documents, the plan was to refinance for the maximum possible amount, then immediately list the property for a quick sale. Spencer's already drawn up a proposed listing agreement. James showed me a document I'd never seen before, a real estate listing agreement for my house, scheduled to go on the market at $420,000, about $50,000 below the current market value for similar homes in my neighborhood. My signature was on that document too. Another forgery. They were going to steal over $500,000, I said. That's what it looks like. The refinance would give them $330 in cash. The quick sale would net them another $380 after commissions and closing costs. Total haul of over $700,000. I stared at the numbers, thinking about the scope and complexity of what Becky and her associates had been planning. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision by a cheating wife. This was organized, systematic financial fraud. How many other people do you think Spencer has done this to? I'm going to find out. But Nathan, if this is what I think it is, we're looking at a federal conspiracy. Wire fraud, identity theft, mortgage fraud, prescription drug trafficking. This is way beyond a simple divorce case. I thought about all the other soldiers deployed overseas, trusting their spouses to handle the home front, never imagining that their military service was making them targets for systematic financials, exploitation. James, I want you to call the FBI. He looked up from his legal pad. The FBI? Nathan, we don't have enough evidence yet to... We have forged documents, identity theft, prescription drug trafficking, and what appears to be a pattern of targeting military families. That's federal jurisdiction. He considered this for a moment. You're right. But they're going to want more than what we have right now. Then we get more. I pulled out my phone and opened an app I hadn't thought about since deployment. The security system I'd installed at the house before leaving had remote monitoring capabilities through a smartphone app. I'd forgotten about it completely until this moment. But suddenly, it seemed like the most important technology in the world. The app loaded slowly on the diner's Wi-Fi. When it finally connected, I was looking at a live feed of my living room. Jeremy was on my couch watching my television, drinking what looked like one of my beers. The timestamp showed the current date and time. James, look at this. He leaned over to see my phone screen. Is that live? Real-time video feed from my house, and it records everything. Everything? Video and audio 24 hours a day, stored on a secure server. I've got 7 months of recordings. James's expression shifted from interested to predatory. Nathan, do you realize what you just handed me? Evidence. More than evidence. You've got a complete video record of a criminal conspiracy being planned and executed in your own home. He pulled out his own phone. I'm calling the FBI right now. While James made the call, I scrolled through the security app, looking at recorded footage from the past few weeks. Most of it was routine, Becky and Jeremy going about their daily lives in my house. But there were other clips that caught my attention. Meetings with people I didn't recognize. Late-night conversations huddled around my kitchen table. Documents spread across my coffee table with Jeremy and Becky studying them carefully. And in several of the recordings, the same thin man in an expensive suit. Dark hair, sharp features, the kind of predatory smile that comes from years of taking advantage of other people's trust. I was willing to bet that was Daniel Spencer. James finished his phone call. FBI wants to meet with us tomorrow morning. Agent Patricia Walsh, White Collar Crime Division. I told her we have video evidence of an ongoing federal conspiracy. What did she say? She said to make sure the video files are backed up in multiple locations and not to do anything that might compromise the investigation. I looked at my phone, again at Jeremy drinking my beer in my living room, completely unaware that every moment was being recorded and transmitted to a secure server thousands of miles away. Don't worry, I said. I'm not going to do anything to compromise the investigation. James looked at me carefully. Nathan, I know you're angry about all this, and you have every right to be. But you need to understand that once we hand this over to the FBI, it's out of our hands. This becomes their investigation, their timeline, their decisions about when and how to move. I understand. Do you? Because right now you're thinking like a soldier who's been attacked and wants to strike back. But this isn't Afghanistan, and Jeremy and Becky aren't enemy combatants. This is federal law enforcement, and it moves slowly and carefully and by the book. I closed the security app and looked at James across the table. He was right to be concerned. Most soldiers in my situation would want immediate direct action, confrontation, threats, physical intimidation. But James didn't understand something important. I wasn't most soldiers. 15 years in the Army had taught me patience, strategic thinking, and the value of letting your enemy defeat themselves. The best military operations are the ones where the enemy never realizes they're under attack until it's too late to respond. James, I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm going to let the system work. He relaxed slightly. Good, because if we do this right, we're going to destroy them completely and legally. That's exactly what I want. I looked around the diner, at the normal people living their normal lives, completely unaware that at a table in the corner, two men were planning the systematic destruction of a criminal conspiracy that had been operating for who knows how long. Tomorrow, we'd meet with the FBI and hand over enough evidence to send multiple people to federal prison for decades. But tonight, Jeremy was still drinking my beer in my living room, thinking he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. He had no idea what was coming for him. Agent Patricia Walsh looked exactly like Central Casting would order if they needed someone to play a federal investigator. Mid-40s, steel gray hair pulled back in a precise bun, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and an expensive charcoal suit that fit perfectly. She carried herself with the kind of confident authority that comes from 20 years of putting criminals in federal prison. We met at the FBI field office in Seattle at 0800 sharp. James had arrived with 2 briefcases full of documents. I had my phone with the security app and a laptop with backup copies of all our financial records. Gentlemen, thank you for coming in, Agent Walsh said, settling into a chair across from us in a sterile conference room. Mr. Hutchinson briefed me on the basic situation, but I'd like to hear the full story directly from you, Sergeant Briggs. I laid it out for her in the same methodical way I'd brief a superior officer on a tactical situation. The deployment timeline, the divorce email, the discovery of the missing money, the forged documents, Jeremy's arrest, and finally the security system that had been recording everything. Agent Walsh listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small black notebook. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment, reviewing what she'd written. This Daniel Spencer, she said finally. You mentioned he appears in your security footage. How often? I've identified him in at least 6 different recordings over the past 3 weeks. Always meeting with Jeremy and my wife, always discussing what appear to be financial documents. And you're certain the signatures on the refinance documents are forged? I pulled out the mortgage application and pointed to the signature line. Agent Walsh, I've been signing my name the same way for 37 years. This isn't my signature. She studied it carefully, then compared it to my signature on the FBI visitor form I'd filled out that morning. I see what you mean. The N is completely different. She made another note. What about the prescription pads found in Jeremy's possession? According to the police report, they came from my wife's dental office. But here's what's interesting. The office reported a break-in 2 months ago. Several prescription pads were listed as stolen. Agent Walsh looked up sharply. Your wife reported prescription pads as stolen, then her boyfriend was arrested with prescription pads in his possession? That's correct. That suggests the break-in was staged to cover the theft. More notes. Sergeant Briggs, I'm going to need access to all your security recordings. Everything from the past 7 months. I opened the laptop and logged into the security system's web interface. It's all here. Video and audio, organized by date and time. Agent Walsh leaned forward as I pulled up a recording from 2 weeks earlier. The video quality was excellent. 1080p high definition with clear audio. Jeremy and Becky were sitting at my kitchen table with Spencer, documents spread between them. "Let me find a good section," I said, scrolling through the timeline. "Here." Spencer's voice came through the laptop speakers, clear and distinct. "The key is timing. We need to get the refinance approved and the cash out before he gets back from deployment. Military guys are predictable. They follow orders, they trust the system, and they don't ask questions until it's too late." Jeremy's voice, "What if he does ask questions?" Spencer laughed. "Jeremy, I've been doing this for 3 years. Military spouses are the perfect targets. The husband is deployed. The wife has legal access to all financial accounts, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, the money is gone and the property is sold." Becky's voice quieter. "How many times have you done this?" "This will be the 12th operation. Each one nets us between 400,000 and 700,000, depending on the property value and how much equity we can extract." Agent Walsh held up a hand. "Stop the recording." She was staring at the laptop screen with the kind of focused intensity I'd seen in combat commanders when they realized they were looking at actionable intelligence. Did he just confess to 11 previous similar crimes? "That's what it sounded like," James said. Agent Walsh stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline while she processed what she'd just heard. "Gentlemen, you've just handed me evidence of a federal racketeering conspiracy. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, mortgage fraud, and systematic targeting of military families." She turned back to us. "This is much bigger than your divorce case." "How much bigger?" I asked. "If Spencer has really victimized 11 other military families, we're looking at potential damages in the millions of dollars. This could be one of the largest military-targeted fraud schemes we've ever investigated." She sat back down and opened her notebook to a fresh page. "I need you to understand that once we open a federal investigation, everything changes. This becomes an FBI operation, with FBI timelines and FBI priorities. Your personal situation becomes secondary to the larger investigation." "Agent Walsh, with respect, my personal situation is what exposed this conspiracy. I'm not looking for personal revenge. I'm looking for justice." She studied me for a moment. "Most people in your position would want immediate action. Arrests, confrontation, dramatic satisfaction. I'm not most people. I'm a soldier. Soldiers understand that the best operations are the ones where the enemy defeats themselves." Agent Walsh smiled for the first time since we'd met. "Sergeant Briggs, I think we're going to work very well together." She pulled out her phone and made a quick call. "This is Walsh. I need a full surveillance team set up immediately. Yes, federal conspiracy. Multiple jurisdictions. At least 12 victims that we know of." While she talked, I scrolled through more of the security recordings, looking for the most incriminating footage. There was a lot to choose from. In one clip from 10 days earlier, Spencer was explaining his business model in detail. "The beauty of targeting military families is the timeline. Deployments are typically 12 to 15 months, which gives us plenty of time to identify targets, build relationships, extract maximum value, and disappear before the husband returns. Even if they figure out what happened, they're dealing with civilian law enforcement that doesn't understand military culture or priorities." In another clip, Jeremy was asking about risk management. "What if one of these military guys decides to come after us directly?" Spencer's response was particularly arrogant. "Jeremy, these are people who spent their entire adult lives taking orders from authority figures. They're not going to step outside the system. They'll hire lawyers, file complaints, maybe threaten lawsuits, but they're not going to do anything actually dangerous." I found that clip particularly interesting, given that Spencer was having this conversation in my living room while I was monitoring every word from 6,000 miles away. Agent Walsh finished her phone call. "Surveillance team will be in position by tomorrow morning. We're going to monitor Spencer's activities, track his communications, and identify any other ongoing operations. What about Jeremy and Becky? We'll monitor them as well, but frankly, they appear to be junior partners in this operation. Spencer is the primary target. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Sergeant Briggs, I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared to testify in federal court about what you've discovered? Because if we move forward with this investigation, it's going to end with trials, and your testimony is going to be crucial. I thought about all the military families who had been victimized by Spencer's operation. Soldiers deployed overseas, trusting their spouses to maintain the home front, never imagining that their service was making them targets for systematic exploitation. Agent Walsh, I've spent 15 years defending this country. If testifying in federal court will help put these people in prison and protect other military families, then yes, I'm prepared to testify. Good, because we're going to destroy them. Over the next 3 days, Agent Walsh's team moved with military precision. They identified Spencer's real estate office, his financial accounts, his communication patterns, and his associates. They discovered that his operation was even larger than we'd initially realized. Spencer had targeted not 12 military families, but 18. The total amount stolen was approaching $5 million. His network included corrupt mortgage brokers, complicit title company employees, and a sophisticated money laundering operation that moved stolen funds through multiple states. But the most interesting discovery came from monitoring Spencer's current activities. He's not stopping, Agent Walsh told me during a briefing at the FBI office. Even with Jeremy in jail and your wife's situation exposed, Spencer is moving forward with the sale of your house. How is that possible? He's found a new accomplice. Apparently, your wife has a sister who's willing to pose as Becky for the closing. They're planning to complete the sale next week. I stared at the surveillance photos on the conference table. Spencer meeting with a woman who looked remarkably similar to Becky, both of them reviewing documents and practicing signatures. They're going to forge my wife's signature too? It appears so. This gives us the opportunity to catch them in the act of committing federal crimes while under surveillance. Agent Walsh spread out a tactical plan on the table. Here's what we're going to do. We let them proceed with the closing. My team will be monitoring from multiple locations, recording everything. The moment they sign forged documents or transfer money illegally, we move in. You want to use my house as bait? Your house is already bait, Sergeant Briggs. Spencer is committed to this operation, and he's going to attempt it regardless of what we do. The question is whether we catch him in the act or arrest him after the fact. I studied the tactical plan, thinking about the timing and logistics. It was solid. Multiple surveillance points, backup teams, coordination with local law enforcement, contingency plans for various scenarios. When does this happen? Tomorrow afternoon. The closing is scheduled for 1400 hours at Spencer's title company. We'll have teams in place by 1200. I looked at the photos of Spencer again, remembering his arrogant voice on the security recordings, his certainty that military personnel were too naive and rule-following to pose any real threat to his operation. Tomorrow, he was going to discover how wrong he was. Agent Walsh, will I be able to monitor the operation? From our surveillance van, yes. I think you've earned the right to watch these people get arrested. That night, I sat in my hotel room and used the security app to watch Jeremy and Becky in my house, completely unaware that their entire operation was about to collapse around them. They were celebrating something. I could see champagne glasses and what looked like takeout from an expensive restaurant. They thought they'd won. Tomorrow, they'd learn the difference between winning and just not losing yet. I opened my laptop and composed an email to Captain Morrison, updating him on my situation and requesting an extension of my emergency leave to testify in federal court. His response came back within an hour. Approved. Make them pay for targeting military families. I closed the laptop and tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. The FBI surveillance van was parked across the street from Spencer's title company. Agent Walsh handed me headphones as her team ran final equipment checks. Audio from inside the building, she explained. Through the van windows, I could see Spencer's BMW parked in front of the building. A woman I didn't recognize was walking toward the entrance with documents. Target 2 is entering the building. Agent Walsh spoke into her radio. I put on the headphones and heard Spencer's voice. Everything is in order. The buyer is eager to close. Cash deal 20,000 below asking. 20 minutes later, they were signing forged documents. All units go, Agent Walsh commanded. I watched FBI agents in tactical gear surround the building. Through the headphones. FBI. Nobody move. Spencer's voice, no longer confident. What the hell is going on? Daniel Spencer, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The arrests took 5 minutes. Spencer, the woman, and the title company employee were let out in handcuffs. 30 minutes later, we were outside my house watching FBI agents arrest Jeremy. He tried to run, made it 50 yards before agents tackled him on my neighbor's lawn. My security cameras captured everything in high definition. The search of my house yielded Jeremy's detailed records of the entire operation. The search of Spencer's office revealed files on 23 military families. Total fraud. Over $7 million. Agent Walsh offered Becky a plea bargain, full cooperation, complete restitution, forfeiture of claims to my assets. In exchange, no federal prison time. 3 hours later, we sat in an FBI conference room with Becky and her attorney. "Nathan, I'm sorry," she said, looking at me directly for the first time since I'd returned. "I know," I said. She signed the plea agreement 20 minutes later. Agent Walsh walked me out as the sun set over Seattle. "All 23 military families are getting their money back," she told me. I drove to my house. My house, not Jeremy's crash pad. I used my key, stepped inside, found one of my beers Jeremy hadn't drunk, and sat in my living room. I opened my laptop and watched the security footage of Jeremy getting tackled by FBI agents. Even more satisfying the second time. I raised my beer to the empty room. I don't start fights, but I do finish them. 6 months later, I testified in federal court. Spencer got 18 years in federal prison. Jeremy got 8 and cried when they read the sentence. The FBI confirmed Spencer's operation had victimized 23 military families over 4 years, stealing $7.2 million. Every family got their money back. The divorce was finalized without contest. I kept everything. Becky kept her freedom and the knowledge she'd helped make things right. I never spoke to her again. There was nothing left to say. Justice served, mission accomplished. That's all I'd ever wanted, and in the end, I got both.